Hello, my name is Peter McMurray. I'm a lecturer in ethnomusicology at the Faculty of Music at Cambridge University, and I'm a fellow at Queen's College. Uh, my area of expertise is a field known as ethnomusicology, or anthropology of music. It tends to focus on music from outside of Europe, focuses on popular musics, focuses on art musics from places like the Ottoman Empire, that is what is now Turkey, India, and so on. Perhaps you're familiar with gamelan music. These are some of the common repertoires that make up ethnomusicology. I actually want to start with a little bit of a story, though, that will set a bit of our agenda for today. Most of my work focuses on Islam. And for those who may be Muslim or are familiar with the Islamic calendar, you may know that starting in just a few days is the month of Muharram. It's a very sacred month for many Muslims, and it's especially important for Shia Muslims. And there are a number of Shia Muslims in Turkey, where I do most of my research. So a few years back, I was in a city called Kars in the far eastern part of Turkey. And I was interviewing people, attending poetry recitations and other kinds of gatherings in the evenings. And on the final day of this series of gatherings, known as Ashura, several congregations in the city of Kars gathered together, and they marched through the city in a procession, reciting poetry, beating their breasts, and lamenting over the death of Hussein, who was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad and was one of the earliest martyrs in Islam. And as we got to the end of these events, I was there with a video camera, was recording things, and a plainclothes policeman came up to me and he started talking to me. Now, it was very loud. There were loudspeakers on the back of trucks, and it was very hard to hear. But he started asking me what I was doing. And, like you might speak in a club, we were sort of yelling to each other's ears. He said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm here doing research. And he said, well, what kind of research? And I said, well, I'm an ethnomusicologist. He said, what's that? And I said, well, I'm interested in music and its role in culture, or something like that. And he said, music? But this isn't music, is it? And I thought it was a really interesting exchange. There was poetry that was being sung, it was being recited, and we could talk about what word would be the best word there. But I think to most Western ears, to most European ears, what was being recited there would sound like music. And we're going to listen to a number of things during the course of this lecture where most of the kind of characteristics that we would typically assign to music probably hold, and yet I think none of it would be considered music. In fact, almost everything we'll listen to is just recitation of the Qur'an, and that would never be considered music by, I think, any Muslim. It has a very different set of connotations. It's understood as recitation. It's understood as its own unique genre of verbal art. In fact, the word Qur'an means literally that which is recited. So the recitation of the Qur'an is simply its own kind of expressive world, we might say. Now, if we were meeting in person, the first thing that I would do would be that I would ask you to write down on a 3x5, on a short, small index card, to write down what you think the definition of music is, what characterizes music, what sets it apart from other things. And in fact, if you'd like, pause this video now, depending on when you're watching it, or maybe when you're done, stop and try and write down what you think the definition of music is. Now, most often I get kinds of responses about maybe certain kind of sonic parameters. That is, there's an organization of pitch, or there's a certain set of rhythms. Sometimes people will talk about expressivity. Sometimes people will talk about emotion, or something that we are trying to convey through music. And these are all really interesting ideas. Some people will perhaps think about animals, non-human animals, that also do things like music. Is bird song music? Is whale song music? So we can start to think through exceptional cases of things. But Islam offers us one very compelling and important tradition, that is the recitation of the Quran, which again is never understood to be music per se, but has a rich tradition of sonic practice, a rich tradition of verbal artistry, we might say, that is guided by rules. It has certain kind of pitch constraints. We might think of them as sort of melodic rules. There are rules for rhythm. There are rules for all kinds of aspects of this in order to ensure that the Quran is recited faithfully, that it's recited in a way that is identical to the way it was received by the Prophet Muhammad as a scriptural text some 1400 years ago. So the emphasis today in this discussion will be mostly on the Quran, but I hope to raise a number of issues about, first of all, what does it mean to study music? Can we imagine studying music outside of a European art music context? Are there kinds of questions we might pose? Are there ways of working that we might go about doing that kind of exploration? And finally, what kinds of issues might emerge if we look at a different musical tradition? And might those issues also then help us understand musics that we know and play or listen to on a daily basis? And again, I hope that there are some of you gathered here for this session who are Muslim and perhaps know much or perhaps the entire Quran by heart and can recite it. Again, if we were in person, it would be wonderful to exchange more directly about that. But I see that as one of the most powerful traditions of sonic arts in the world today. And it's one that you can find being practiced in really rich ways throughout the UK. You don't need to travel far away to find this. There are many mosques in the UK that have really tremendously talented reciters. So with that kind of preface, I'd like to share a number of video clips basically and other things that you can find online in order to share something that's a little more interactive than me giving a PowerPoint lecture or something like that. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll listen to a number of things. I'm not sure how high quality the audio will be, but hopefully if you're interested in it, then you can subsequently go and find these files online. So I'd like to start with a recitation by a reciter named Rashid Al-Afasi. Sheikh Al-Afasi may be considered by many to be the greatest reciter living today, certainly one of the most prominent ones in the Gulf area. So here is his recitation of the first surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha. And you can see here a congregation gathered for communal prayers. This is during the month of Ramadan, and we'll talk more about what all we're listening to in a moment, but this is about a minute of the recitation again of the first surah or chapter of the Quran.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
So this is part of his recitation for congregational prayers again. We see many people gathered here. We hear them responding with the word Ameen at the end of this recitation. This is a very interactive process here, and we see this situated within a ritual context, we might say. And we can imagine any number of rituals, and by ritual I don't necessarily mean specifically a religious ritual. And if we think about the musical experiences that we participate in on a regular basis, we would see that there are all kinds of other rituals. For instance, we might think of a concert of classical music as another set of rituals where we clap when the performer comes on stage. We have certain codes of behavior for how we dress, how we hold ourselves when we sit down, when we stand up, and so on. In some way, this is an analogous situation. I don't want to say this is a concert. This is an act of worship. Perhaps some of you have sung in chapel choirs or something like that, where you have participated in a kind of musical liturgy, and that starts to get a little bit closer here. But in any case, we see the sheikh here reciting as part of congregational prayers, which will involve the whole community reciting to themselves. Also, it will involve them kneeling and prostrating. It will involve more extensive recitations of other parts of the Quran by him. So we see a setting in which the Quran is embedded in ritual. And that question of ritual and music is, again, a really important one for ethnomusicologists, and one that we can pose not only of traditions outside of Europe, but we can pose those of a nightclub in London. We can pose those of music that we make in our own home. We can even start to think about those in the ways we listen to, say, listen to music on our phones as we're walking to and from school or something like that. We have certain kinds of rituals and practices that repeat themselves. This is a formalized ritual, a religious ritual again, and it's a very important one, embedded as it is as part of Ramadan, a month-long fast that is very important for Muslims around the world. Now, what he has recited is Surah al-Fatiha. This is the first surah of the Quran. This is, incidentally, however, not the first surah revealed to Muhammad, and we'll talk about that again in just a moment. But this is a passage of the Quran that is recited repeatedly as part of prayers. It's recited as in a variety of different contexts as part of people's daily lives and rituals. Must be certainly one of the most recited passages of any kind of scriptural text, or really any text in the world, I would imagine, though I don't know statistics on that. And it is an invocation to God. Begins Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of God or Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. You'll see there are different translations here. I'm looking at Qur'an.com, which can provide a whole different host of them. But you'll see on the right, here we have the Arabic text, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. And this text then goes, and it continues. It's only a few verses long, and so it's short enough that children and effectively all Muslims are expected to have this memorized. It's something that anyone can learn, and then it gets recited over and over in different contexts. Muhammad first started receiving revelation during contemplative sessions he would have in the cave Hira outside of the city of Mecca. Mecca is today located in Saudi Arabia, and around the year 610 of the Common Era, that is 610 AD, Muhammad was visited by the angel Jibreel, or Gabriel, often as it's rendered in English, and he was commanded to recite. He was commanded the word Iqra. The angel told him recite, and this word Iqra is the same root as Qur'an. He was told to recite this message, and he said, well, I don't know how to recite. I don't know what you're talking about. In some translations, this word recite would be understood as read. It's kind of interchangeable. And he was indeed illiterate. So you have this moment in which Muhammad is sort of overcome by an angel. He finally starts to recite the words that the angel is teaching him. And over time, he then receives a series of revelations that get codified eventually as the Quran. There are 114 different chapters or surahs in the Quran, and each of them is made up of different verses or ayahs. We can continue on to think more generally about the Quran. I won't spend much time here. I'd encourage you to read on Wikipedia if you don't know anything about the Quran, but for most people in the UK, they probably think of it as a book, and that's not entirely incorrect. It is often most visible as a book of scripture, we might say again. But here we see a number of points that I think highlight a more performative aspect of the Quran. It's a word that means literally that which is being read or recited. Again, this word Iqra can mean both in Arabic. It was revealed to Muhammad mostly through the angel Jibreel, although he received a variety of different kinds of revelation. And the thing that I'm really interested in is the ways in which this gets recited. So I'd like to actually jump ahead to another video. This is made by an imam in America, and he is very interested not just in the kind of ritual and sacred history of the text, but also how it gets performed. So I'm going to let this run for a couple minutes, although I know our time is limited. I think it's a very useful introduction to what are known as maqam, or the kind of modes and scales used in reciting the Qur'an. The plural of maqam is maqamat. So you see here, this is the art of maqamat in the Qur'an.
كذبت ثمود بطغواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم Assalamu alaikum everyone, Imam Aziz here. I'm sitting on top of this beautiful hill, overseeing this remarkable scene and enjoying every bit of beauty it has to offer us. I have with me Sheikh Rifat right here, who is one of the most established reciters of the Qur'an in Northern California. And I wanted to demonstrate to you a really cool feature of the Qur'an. Of course, we know that the Qur'an bears a remarkable amount of rules and regulations and injunctions and teachings. But I'm focused today on a particular aspect of the beauty of the Qur'an, which is how it's recited in a nice and melodic way. Sheikh Rifat recited the Qur'an and he memorized it at a very young age, but he was never taught the science of maqamat. So I will show you that without him knowing anything about maqamat, he actually recites in those maqamat naturally. So what I'll do is that I will start reciting the Qur'an in a particular maqam. I will hand it over to the Shaykh, and you will see that he will pick it up naturally without any hesitation, and it's going to be a really, really cool thing. So please enjoy it with us. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد ووالد وما ولد لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد أيحسب أن لن يقدر عليه أحد يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا أيحسب.
I'm going to cut them off there. You're welcome to look at this video. It's a very rich introduction to this system of maqam, but it gives us a sense of what kind of vocal and melodic practices are involved. So if we imagine a young person starting to learn the Qur'an, often today they will start to read it. They will learn the letters in Arabic, but traditionally that wasn't necessarily the case. There is a long history of people, as we see here, learning some amount of this orally, that is through listening. There are a massive number of rules for the actual pronunciation of the Qur'an, and many people learn these again as a form of reading. You can find them online easily. But it's important to note that even these rules, for many people historically, would have been learned by ear. So this is what we might call, in some instances, an oral tradition. Not everyone, many people are fully literate, and there's a long history of intense and rich literacy in Muslim communities. However, there's a parallel tradition of people learning these things by ear and becoming quite proficient in them. So this question of oral traditions can be an important part of ethnomusicology as well. And often they're quite hybrid, as we see here. So the imam there seems to have learned these formal scales in a more technical way. If you're interested, I won't take the time now, but there are a number of resources online where you can, for instance, learn maqam bayati, which is the maqam we just heard. And this video, for instance, would teach you how to use it. You may think to yourself, well, I'm not necessarily interested in learning how to recite the Quran. That's fine. These maqam are also used throughout the Middle East, including in places like Turkey with slight variations, as the sort of repertoire or store of melodic material for their classical music traditions. So if you were to learn Arab classical music, if you were to listen to the music of, say, Kulthum, you would hear these same modes being used. It's a different system for organizing pitches. So for instance, this is how we would notate maqam bayati in Western notation. We see the second note, this quarter tone flat. So we have microtones in the scale, but otherwise it resembles somewhat closely what we might think of as a minor scale. And this maqam then guides, again, recitation of the Qur'an, but also guides musical compositions. And it can, in fact, also guide a number of improvisations where a performer will think about which pitches are good to rest on, which pitches are good to ascend, which ones are good for descending. And these are traditions that we can find analogs to in European art music as well, historically. But this gives you a sense of the kind of technical resources and the technical skill that is used in reciting the Quran. So again, not a musical tradition, and yet it has something we can notate as fixed pitches. We can notate the rhythms of that recitation and analyze it like a piece of music. I hope you have had the chance to watch Quran by heart, or if not, I hope you will avail yourselves of that opportunity. That film shows, it's a documentary showing a kind of competition, an international competition for young people who have memorized the entire Quran. So it follows, in the section I sent you, especially a 10-year-old from Tajikistan named Nabiullah. I won't replay this clip, but I'd encourage you to watch it and particularly pay attention to not just the technical aspects which we've now discussed, but also the way that this moves the judges. So one of the judges, who's an extremely important reciter of the Quran, the head judge of this competition, starts weeping when he hears this boy recite the Quran. And interestingly, when they bring Nabiullah up, they start talking to him and they realize he doesn't actually understand Arabic. He has memorized the Quran as a set of sounds, as a set of words, but not words that necessarily have semantic meaning to him entirely. He knows some of it, but he's not able to carry out a conversation in Arabic. For these judges, that's a miracle. For us, we might think of that as a real act of virtuosity. We might also think about what the implications are of memorizing a text and not knowing what it means. But that may not be so different from some of us who may have sung pieces in German or in Russian in choirs where we more or less do the same thing. We may not know word for word what it is we're singing. But I do want to close with a slightly different excerpt of this for about a minute. This is another performer named Rifta, who is from Maldives. She is a 10-year-old also. She's a girl. Here's a little bit of her performance.
Lidi forward nenge vinu yeves neng nangoi tanu bappa boafa eri furta nenge gene ke weekans apa wingoni eni kiyawan soal kono pasi miru gane kore kiyen kam erat kare kiyen kam hitangaron kiyen.
You can understand if a child just wake up and starts using everything in her mind, it will be very difficult.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ذلك الذي يبشر الله عباده الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات.
So I'm going to pause that there. I'd encourage you to watch that, to watch the documentary in its entirety if you're able to find the time. It's available on YouTube. I want to highlight one thing though. Well, two things actually. So the Imam is going to come on after this, or one of the judges will come on and talk about how men and women are considered equal in Islam, which is an idea that may not be part of the received wisdom or the common understanding of Islam. He also then goes on to say that women have played an important role in the history of reciting the Quran and learning its proper recitation. But I want to highlight broadly this question of performance. And this is something that musicology is also increasingly interested in. How do we discuss a performance in real time, the way it unfolds in a context like the one we've just seen here? What kinds of aspects are there that emerge here where we aren't necessarily listening to the greatest reciter in the world? Instead, we're listening to a 10-year-old child who is outstanding, who is excellent, who has memorized the whole Quran. what do we make of that? How do we understand that performance? And again, we could think about this as a set of in a number of different ways, as a set of sort of technical questions about the production of pitch, as a question of transmission. Does one learn these things by ear, or learning it through a kind of more formal apprenticeship or almost a musical training? And we have this question then finally of gender, sort of identity. What does it mean for a 10-year-old girl from Maldives to perform that versus, let's say, a 10-year-old girl growing up in Birmingham or something like that, where we might have similar kinds of dynamics and yet some very important distinctions too. So this has been a whirlwind tour of the questions raised by reciting the Qur'an and thinking a little bit about ethnomusicology. I appreciate your attention, and I hope that you'll consider the ways in which we might explore music all around us, music that we see on a daily basis, and also things that are making sounds in organized and meaningful ways that we may not think of as music necessarily at all. So I'll leave you with that thought. Please do be in touch if you have any questions or concerns or anything was unclear. And thank you again for your attention and for participating in this workshop. I hope you have a wonderful time throughout the rest of the week, and I wish you all the best with your musical futures going forward. Thank you very much.